Today, on Equal Matters, exactly what I learned because I went for it, it being the career that I wanted. Thank you for being here. My name is Rob Hunter, Cal the Guitar Hero from the Color 8, a Phoenix-based band on that intro. And today, I consider myself to be incredibly fortunate. And I'm not sure if it's fortunate because I chased the career that I wanted or because I had the opportunity to chase the career that I wanted. But either way, it comes down to the fact that I'm incredibly grateful for that. And I learned a lot about myself in the process of going for it. So in case you're new to me, for 25 years, I was a talk radio show host talking about American history and American politics and American culture, studying it, researching it. It was a job that I absolutely loved, a job that I wanted to do since I was 22 years old. Radio, a career I wanted to do since I was 17. In order to pursue a career in media or anything that you want to do, something that maybe feels like a calling, in order to do that, you have to make some sacrifices. But you learn a ton along the way. And today, some of those lessons in going for it, in case you're at that point or thinking about going for it, or maybe your kids are thinking about going for it, I would encourage everybody to do so. So I just want to back up and explain why I decided to go for it. It was at the age of 17. And I explained it a little bit last week here on Equal Matters, but it just felt like the right thing to do to pursue a career in radio. Now, at the time, 17, I had no idea what it would entail. I thought it would be easy. I thought it was go to college, get a degree, get your job in your field because you have that college degree, and start with a salary of $50,000. Well, my story wasn't exactly that. I was 17, I went to Emerson College. I graduated when I was 21. In June, I turned 21 after I graduated. I turned 22 a month after I graduated. I moved to Florida in July. I got my first radio job in September of that year. And it was a part-time job, and it paid $8 an hour. Now, eventually that parlayed into a full-time job. Some of the reasons why we'll talk about today on Equal Matters, where we talk about realism, we give you some depth, and we hope that that knowledge you can use in your own life or someone you know's life. Because when you go for it, you're going to face these walls that you got to climb. It's just part of it. So that first was the $8 an hour, parlayed into that full-time job that I mentioned where I got paid $17,000 a year. Wasn't a lot of money. I had to supplement my income working at the Olive Garden as a waiter. But those are part of the lessons in going for it. So I'll break them down into really what is 8 lessons that I've learned because I went for it, that are going to seem pretty obvious, but here's the reality of it, is not everyone wants to follow through with it. I went to college with a lot of people who wanted to study radio and wanted to be TV hosts, but faced a little adversity or realized what the career was all about, moving around, that they didn't do it. Pardon me if you hear something in the background. It is apparently hunting season in Italy, where I'm fortunate enough to be here. Fortunate, again, is that key word because I'm at basically a winery. It's an Airbnb in Tuscany, Italy. Behind me, to my right, is a medieval town called San Gimignano. And this is a town that dates back to the 1300s, even before that. But it's what you'd expect to see out of a medieval structure. If you walk in this town, which I encourage you to do if you ever get to Italy, it is almost like transporting you back in time. Because this community in San Gimignano, when it first became a community, was a commune, which means they shared everything and they worked hard and they built this facility up, and there's a tall tower which serves as the lookout to look over these hills where I'm at. And I say the word fortunate to have been here because it gives me a perspective of how fortunate I was to be born now and be alive now. Because if you were born in the 1340s in San Gimignano, you basically lived behind those walls. You didn't have the option to pick the career that you wanted. You did what was necessary. But in the modern day, at least in America, you get that option. If you get to go to college, you get to choose which path that you want to choose. And oftentimes people do it for money. I didn't. I did it out of, I don't know if I would even call it a calling. It just felt right. It felt like fun because I in the back of my head, I thought about a career as time, because you're going to be spending a lot of your time doing this career. So I thought, well, I might as well enjoy doing it, at least as best as possible. So I picked a good radio career that afforded me the ability to do that. And in doing so, that's when I learned the lessons. Pardon the wind, too, as, again, I'm here, Tuscany hillside, looking at this ancient world where people were not as fortunate as me. But the big lesson number one is do what others won't do. And it's really not hard to differentiate yourself when you do that. Because when you say yes, which is part of doing what others won't do, the bosses notice. Not every boss, but some bosses. And as I think back and reflect, I realize how fortunate I was. Again, that word keeps coming up. That I had my first boss, a guy named Andrew Lee. Drew passed away a little over a year and a half ago at the age of 49. And it saddens me to this day because of what he meant for me in my career. So because I went to college and I had my skills and I put a lot of effort into learning those skills, I was able to advance at my first job because I could do a lot of things. He didn't have to teach me how to start the job. He didn't have to teach me how to do the news or read the news. I just knew how to do that because that's what I went to college for. So because I was willing to do what others wouldn't do, because I said yes, and I got good at saying yes, I got noticed. And Andrew, even though he was only paying me $8 an hour or $17,000 full-time, he let me go. He let me flourish. He let me try things. He let me fill in as a talk show host. Then he gave me my own weekend show because I was willing to do what others would not do. And there's another big lesson in that. So lesson number one, do what others won't. Lesson number two, when you're going for it, is you got to commit. It's the only way. Because many people go for it and they drop out. Realize they have to move to Gainesville, Florida to get a first job, or somewhere in Oklahoma or somewhere in Tennessee, and they want to do it. Because in our business, the media business, you got to start small. In any specialized trade or skill, that's how you got to start. You start, you make your sword, using the old medieval, excuse me, language and terminology out here. But if you want to be the best sword maker, you got to commit to making swords. You want to be the best guitar player. We talked to Cal, Guitar Hero, here on Equal Matters. You got to commit. In other words, you got to go all in. Because when I committed to the job, I just stayed with it, no matter the adversity. So somewhere along the line, I just was able to find that commitment. And what happens when you go all in is you get to lesson number three. And lesson number three is create your opportunities. Because when I look back at the opportunities I was given, and it's often said that luck is when preparation meets opportunity, it's not really so much luck. I think that is not really an accurate phrase. At least it's not in my case. Because the first time I got to fill in as a talk show host, it was a big moment for me because I just turned 23 years old. And it goes back to being committed because I was so committed, I sometimes had to sacrifice. I had to miss things, which is something to be prepared for, which is another like mini lesson. We'll call it lesson number 4. So we got lesson number 1, do what others don't. We got lesson number 2, you got to commit to it. Lesson number 3 is the sacrifices, which lead to creating the opportunities. So because I was willing to work at Christmas Eve, because I was willing to work at Christmas Day, I mean, it was an early morning shift. I would go in early. I'd go in at like 4. I'd be home by maybe 10, 10:30. So it wasn't that big of a deal. I didn't miss out much, except I had to wake up early on the holidays and go in. But by doing that, my boss, again, Andrew, said to me, you can do a segment or two. And pardon me if you've heard me tell this story before, but it's very important when it comes to how you go for it, because you create those opportunities because you did what others didn't, and you committed to it. So anytime the boss asked me to do something, yes, but it wasn't just saying yes, it was also offering things. So I remember at the station, it was called the Sky. Call letters were WSKY, W if you're east of the Mississippi, K if you're west of the Mississippi. It was creating an opportunity to go cover Florida Gators athletics that led to more opportunities for me. So I went to them and I said, hey, look, Florida Gators have press conferences, I can't remember, it's like Thursday before games. Would you let me go cover them? And they were like, yeah, absolutely. So I started to do that. And I started to get to ask questions of Steve Spurrier, the then Florida Gator coach, the Gator who's won a national championship other than Urban Meyer. So that's a pretty big deal for a 22-year-old kid to be able to do that, to ask the Florida Gators questions. Again, I was committed, and I created that opportunity. And because I made that sacrifice and working on Christmas Eve, I got that opportunity to fill in as a talk show host. And Drew got to hear me, and he said it was pretty good. That led to my first talk show, which led to my second talk show. So you see how all these things line together when you decide to go for it, if you stay committed. Because when you're committed, the other ones fall in line. Because you're committed, you do what others don't, you create other opportunities. Some people might call that a purpose. And for me, I explained it a couple weeks ago, I did find a purpose in talk radio. The purpose for me was more of a public service, if I could say it so bluntly. And it really hit home during Hurricane Katrina. I covered that in New Orleans. I stayed there. I lived there. It really became my community, my home. And it was an obligation for me as a talk show host when the storm was coming to go to work and get people the most accurate information that I could get a hold of, that I could figure out, that I could talk to, so that people had the up-to-date information. So I say that because there was a purpose in it. And that's part of the commitment. So for me, that purpose was inform as many people as I could. And I tried to do that through my views politically. I've tried to do that through my views in sports. It was about information and opinions wrapped around that information, or points of view wrapped around that information. But I was able to get to those positions because of these lessons, right? I decided to go for it at the age of 17. I decided to do what others don't. I decided to commit, knowing that I would make sacrifices, but that's what created opportunities for me, which brings up a very important lesson. We're going to go 1, we got 2, we got 3, we got 4. The 5th lesson so far, face the tests. And this is true no matter your chosen profession. The tests are coming. Starts in school. You want to test your knowledge, make sure you remember things, see if you can think critically. But in my case, the real world was a broadcasting world. And for me, this is really about survival, if you look at it. And I think this is due to having a purpose, because when you have a purpose, you feel it, you believe it, you commit to it. So maybe that lesson that we just talked about when I said commit, maybe the real lesson is purpose. So for me, after 9/11, I found a true purpose in being a talk show host, because it was such a moving event. It changed the world. And we're still dealing with the ramifications of that today. And I still very much care about that. And I still have a purpose in that, because I found that in my business, not too many people explain the depth of the decisions, which we have done here on Equal Matters over the last month or so. So that purpose is still there, and that allowed me to face the tests. So for anyone out there going for it, if your kids are going for it, prepare them that the tests are coming. Just like in school. Sometimes you're going to get an A, sometimes you're going to get a D, sometimes you're not prepared and you're going to fail. But you got to get up the next day and you got to get back to work. Because I really do think of our body's survival instinct. We all have it. It's instinctual. From 2 million years ago, the humans first started to populate. And even before that, if you understand that DNA is shared throughout the course of time in Earth, every species, no matter how big, no how small, how simple, how complex, its main instinct is to survive, to stay alive. And in the modern world, for me, speaking person to person with you, is how I learned to survive in the media industry. Now, it's not like it was over here in San Gimignano, the medieval town I just told you about in Italy that I'm sitting near. That was different. We went there today, my family and I, and we sat at a restaurant, and I had this wild boar pappardelle pasta, which was phenomenal. And those are the, perhaps, gunshots you can hear in the background. Apparently it is wild boar hunting season here, as I mentioned, And it finds itself right there in that bowl with fresh-made pasta. And I looked over at my family while we were there, and I said, you think they did this in 1349 in San Gimignano? Had nice big meals, elaborate, where you could drink some wine. Because it seemed like back then, it was all about survival. I watched Game of Thrones way too late, and I've not seen all of it. But I remember this one scene, I can't remember which season it was in which one of the main characters, one of the big guards, says to one of the daughters, should eat now because you might not eat for a couple of days or a few days. And I tried to imagine life like that. A life on the road in 1710 or 1349. You might go miles and miles and miles without seeing anybody, without coming across a town, a service station. So to be able to sit there on this patio in this medieval town and enjoy a homemade meal, basically, is just absolutely amazing. Because there's a time when you're facing the tests that you have to sacrifice things. Family time, family vacations being some of them. So for me, the tests popped up in the radio industry as moving. I mentioned that in previous episodes of Equal Matters that I moved 6 times, or I moved to 6 states in 7 years. And I've been settled in Phoenix since 2007, but I've moved 3 times in Phoenix. But that moving moves you away from the familiar, what you know. So it gives you the option and the ability to learn how to adapt. So, for example, I can come here to Italy in San Gimignano, figure out my way around. Now, granted, it's not that hard, but I also have many practices of having moved so much. I moved to Florida, I knew a couple people. I moved to New Orleans, I knew no one. I moved to Farmington, I didn't know anybody. I moved to Phoenix, I knew a couple people just barely. But you take the chance. But there is a sacrifice on the other end of that, right, that I talked about. That's one of those lessons. Do what others won't. Commit. Find your purpose. Be willing to make the sacrifices because you'll create your opportunities. And then these tests that come along in our 5th lesson are exactly that. You might miss out on family vacations. So when you go for it, you got to decide on that. You got to decide if the chase is worth it. And I'll explain why I believe that the chase is worth it here in just a couple of minutes. But there's that trade-off that you have to understand if you're going to go for it. Because it's not easy. I look back with fulfillment, I look back with satisfaction at my career, but if you asked me that when I was 23, I would have told you a different story. If you asked me that when I was 32, I would have told you a different story. Because there were trying times, it's not all sunshine and rainbows, because one of those other tests for me was money. So I could have pursued a career that paid more, certainly. I could have left the radio career to find a career that paid more, because just about all of them do until you get to a certain point. But I kept at it, because this is what I wanted to do. It felt right, and I never abandoned that, because I committed to it. I fought through burnout, another one of those tests where sometimes you work 32 days in a row. Why? Because you do. Because you're committed. Because you go for it. And then you understand now as you get a little bit older, you got to find a little bit more balance in your life. But you only learn that by going through it. The gauntlet, as it's called. So you have to be able to face the test if you're going to go for it. That's lesson number 5. And then this is important lesson number 6, too. Because, like I said, it's not all sunshine and rainbows when you go for it. I can't just tell you every day of my life has been absolutely amazing. Because obviously that's not true. It's not true for anybody. But here's what I can tell you. Just about every day that I have now, no matter what, is enjoyable. Because of lesson number 6. I've opened myself up to learn. No matter what happens. Give you an example of how I apply this now. So this is going to sound a little bougie, but sometimes in a foreign country, when you travel between locations, I know, first world problems, you face many tests. So for example, we're going from Rome to Florence, and we're renting a car in Florence. So we go to the train station in Rome, no big deal. Until the credit card doesn't go through. So we missed the first train, the second train, the third train while we're trying to figure this all out because all the trains keep selling out. So again, a minor test. You could fly off the handle. You could yell at the people that are trying to help you, but you don't. You roll with it. because you open yourself up to learn. Like, what can I learn about this situation? What can I learn the next time? And over the years, I programmed myself to do that almost automatically. So, for example, I'll give you a good example in the NFL. Let's say Patrick Mahomes. So Patrick Mahomes, phenomenal quarterback. Let's say he is marching his team down the field, the Kansas City Chiefs, and then Mahomes steps back to pass, and he throws an interception in the end zone. He's probably going to say some things to himself in his head, but he's going to go over to the sideline. You know what he's going to do? He's going to learn. What did I miss? He's going to pick up the tablet. He's going to look at the defense, and he's going to figure it out to learn that lesson so he doesn't repeat. So that's that opportunity that tests present if you open yourself up to learn. Lesson number 6. So that wasn't even the only test yesterday. We got on the train. Everything was fine. The train's supposed to be like an hour and a half. Ended up being 2 hours. So now you're dragging behind. The rental car place in Florence is about 0.7 miles down the street. It starts to rain. So you get what I'm getting at, right? It's not necessarily that you can learn from the rain, but you can learn how to travel differently. You can learn how to adapt this to the next time if there is a next time. That's what opening yourself up to learn is all about. So for me in that career, what I learned about myself with the ability to stay committed to face the tests, because that commitment and that purpose is really the heartbeat of what it takes to go for it. That heartbeat, that purpose, is what propels you when you want to quit. And don't get me wrong, I wanted to quit many times, which is lesson number 7. Don't give up. So I'm going to recap the lessons here because I know there's a lot coming at you. So number 1, when you decide to go for it and you chase your career and you're like, this is what I want to do, understand that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be the first time you open a microphone. In my case, you're going to sound like Rush Limbaugh, who was the greatest talk show host of all time. Most successful anyways. I grew up in the school of Neil Bortz, who was based in Atlanta. And I mentioned, I think it was last week on Equal Matters, that I was up for a job at that station. And I almost got it, but I didn't. And it stung and it hurt. And I could have given up right there. I could have said, you know what, I'm out. But I didn't. Because this is where the tests always come in. And I'll explain the tests, and I'll explain why you don't give up. Because the rewards are great when you don't give up. So for me, the Atlanta fill-in gig was right after Hurricane Katrina. And I was hoping that I could get some sympathy, of which I did. Now, to my credit, I worked very hard. I believe that I'm very good at what I do. But I believe it comes down to that purpose and that commitment and that willingness to do what others won't. Even to this day, I never stopped doing that because I always approach my talk show as, I heard this term recently, as being a knowledge broker. So yes, I would share knowledge on my talk shows, but it was knowledge that I learned and I spent hours learning because I love to learn. I love to read. And I knew that I would read more than just about every other talk show host in America because I was committed, I was purposeful, and I wanted to be the best. And you look at these lessons and see how they all tie together, right? Doing what others don't, being committed, willing to make the sacrifices. That creates your opportunities. Then you face the tests. And if you open yourself up to learn, you learn from the tests. And you learn from the tests, ultimately, that you cannot give up. So, go back to Atlanta here. I get this opportunity, and I thought it was mine. I convinced myself it was mine. But it wasn't meant to be. Because another test had to pop up. And that's something that's pretty consistent, not just in a career that you want, but just in life. Because life is outside of your control for the most part. Things happen. You can only control what you do with what happens, which is why you don't give up. So I faced that task. After I did not get the Atlanta job, I just couldn't find a job. I applied for a lot of jobs. Jobs I was qualified for, jobs I was overqualified for, jobs I was not qualified for, at least on paper. I was 27 years old. I'm applying for jobs in New York. Nobody really is hiring 27-year-olds to do radio in New York. But I held out that belief. New York is the best media market, the biggest media market. That's where there's more notoriety, more money, and New York's an awesome city, in my opinion. So that was always part of the dream. But the dream was really about being successful and being good at it so that people listened. We're judged on ratings. we're judged on revenue, and now we're judged on social media. But it's the ratings that I always went after, because that meant to me that I was doing the work and that we were doing well. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to, I guess, hang up the microphone for now, because I don't feel that there's anything else left to accomplish for me, because Russell and Hunter, with my big brother Mike Russell, were number one several different times. Never happened in our station history in our afternoon day part. And in thinking that, I'm like, all right, this feels great. It feels like a dream achieved. So I started to broaden the dream, and I'm going to apply these same lessons that I'm telling you today to my new life and my new career at the age of 45, because I don't give up. And I didn't give up when I had to move to Farmington, New Mexico. Because again, I said I was applying for all these jobs, and I was getting some callbacks, but after a while I was getting none. So the sympathy was out. So I was scratching and clawing, trying to figure it out, trying to figure out how to survive. I was running out of money, and I almost gave up. So it was maybe end of January after Katrina. Katrina was in 05, so it was January 06. I still don't have a job. After spending a few months in Atlanta, I'd gone back to hang out with my parents and my brother for a little bit. So I was living there, and I'm still applying for radio jobs, still trying to how to get by, figure out how to get by. And then I get a call back. And I told you last week, it was from a place that I'd never heard of. A city I didn't know where it was, other than it was in New Mexico. The last place that I wanted to go after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Again, I thought I was hot shit. I got my talk show at 25, gone by 27. So here I am, 27 years old, closing in on 28, facing the fact that I have to nail this test. I didn't think about it as a test at the time, but I knew I wasn't ready to give up yet. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bite the bullet here, and I'm going to go move to Farmington, New Mexico. I'm going to see how long it takes me to get out of there, because at least I'll stay in the industry. And I remember this because Katrina was such a monumental moment in my life. My car was still in New Orleans 8 months later. It had been flooded, but not flooded enough to be totaled. And obviously there was a lot of cars in similar situations, so the backup to get the car fixed was unbelievable. And I think that they had just finished fixing up my car like a month or 2 or 3 weeks before I was going to move to Farmington. So again, this is 8 months after Katrina. So I don't have a car. I'm living with my parents. I am desperate to find a job. But I'm committed still. So committed I was willing to take this job in Farmington. So what I had to do is I had to fly to New Orleans, get my car, pack it up with what I had, and drive to New Mexico. And that's what I did, because that's another test. And in order to get out of Farmington, I took a step back career-wise, right? I had already had my own talk show. My name was on a show, and for us in this business, it's very important. Typically, you don't have hosts that go backwards and be producers. Most will stay where they're at and work their way back up, but I had an opportunity. And that opportunity to get out of Farmington, is the way I saw it at the time, turned into be a blessing, because I got to work with one of the best, Daryl Ancarlo, who I mentioned last week. But I could have given up any time there, because I was getting paid $35,000 a year, and I was working hard. I was working 10, 12 hours a day. I was working on weekends. I hadn't even officially started working yet. So this is going to be the early January. It's like the 8th or 9th of January in 2007. So I hadn't filled out any paperwork at my old station. I hadn't signed any documents. That was going to be that Monday. And I get a call from Daryl on Sunday. And he says, hey, I just read this news story. There's a pizza company here in Phoenix, Pizza Patron, that just announced that they're going to accept pesos in stores. Get someone to come on and talk to me about that on tomorrow's show. And again, I haven't signed any paperwork yet. It's a Sunday. Most people are not available on Sundays, but I'm like, okay, see if I can do this. Again, face the test. So I spend some time, I do some Googling, I find a corporate number, email or something or other, and I write an email or I make a phone call. And lo and behold, they get back to me. And I don't remember if it was the owner of Pizza Patron that joined us, but it was some high up. And I got it done, even though I hadn't signed any paperwork yet. So it was a very interesting lesson in again, being committed and not giving up, because this is that massive lesson. But because I didn't give up doing that job, working with Daryl, I learned a ton. And I became better at what I do because of it. I learned more. I learned to think bigger. I learned to persevere even more. Because when you do decide to go for it, and you do decide to step into these lessons, what you get out of it is so rewarding. So there were other times I could have given up too. So for example, for 5 years, working at KFYI, my last station, I was doing the KFYI download at 5 a.m. 5 a.m. is early, but preparing for 5 a.m. is even earlier. There were some nights I went to bed at 6:45 to get back to those sacrifices, being willing to make them. And I'll use Cal, the guitar hero in the Color 8, who we talked to a couple weeks ago here on the podcast as well, Equal Matters. That the sacrifices are worth it, because in order to get really great at something, you can't avoid them. It just happens. So for Cal to be as good on the guitar as he is, he's had to spend time doing it. Because ultimately life is all about time, right? What do you want to spend your time doing? Do you want to spend your time doing things you love? Or do you want to spend time doing things you tolerate because of what you can do with the time that you have while tolerating the 8 to 10 hours a day? And for me, I always looked at it as life is short. I get to do this once. So I want to make sure I spend time doing things that I like to do. Even though sometimes it felt like getting punched in the face, metaphorically speaking, kicked in the back. Because it's tough. It's not all sunshine and rainbows. But that's when you learn to be resilient, when you don't give up. You don't pull the hatch and say, I'm done, I want a more comfortable path, or I want a safer path. So I want to rewind, because there's one more important lesson, the 8th lesson in going for it. But we go back to the top. Do what others won't do if you want to go for it, because you'll advance faster. Number 2, commit. You might call this a purpose. Find a purpose that you believe in, because when you find that purpose you believe in, you'll be willing to make the sacrifices. But that's why it's lesson number 3, that word sacrifices, because you got to be prepared for it. You got to be prepared for the trade-off. You might miss out on family vacations that I did because I was working, I didn't have enough time off. Or because I was so committed I wanted to be at work. So there's your 3 lessons. Which gets you to number 4. Because if you do those, do what others don't, you commit, you find your purpose, you make the sacrifices, you create opportunities. As I mentioned, it's often said that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I don't buy that. Because you create your opportunities by what you do. It's not luck. It's just preparation, because you do it every day. And that's what preparation is. Michael Jordan wasn't great because he showed up 82 games a year and in the playoffs. No, Michael Jordan was great because he showed up every day. He went to the weight room before everybody else. He went to the weight room after practice. He practiced for hours. Worked on his shots. That's what it takes. You do more than everybody else and do what others won't do. You stay committed. You're willing to make the sacrifices. And they might just be time sacrifices, right? But you create those opportunities. So there's your other lesson. Lesson number 5, face the tests, because they're coming. No matter the industry, no matter the life, just face it. Go head on. Don't run from it. Don't hide. The obstacle is the way, as the Stoics like to say. It's so true. Lesson number 6, open yourself up to learn, especially when you face those tests, because you're not only going to learn about how to do things differently, more effectively the next time, you're going to learn about yourself, which is one of the most important things you can learn about. Lesson number 7, don't give up. I never gave up. Not really sure why, to be honest with you, other than purpose. And because I didn't give up, I learned a ton about myself as well. And lesson number 8, super important lesson. I'm going to quote Bruce Lee. Be water. Be adaptable. And that's what all that leads up to. Because when you can figure out how to be adaptable to life, you can let whatever happens roll off your shoulders. I mentioned the travel the other day. Again, it's a first world problem, I understand it. But it tries your patience. And when it tries your patience, and you learn how to adapt, and you learn how to be water and go with the flow, you're better adapted to anything to get back to creating your opportunities. So because of these lessons, I am very prepared to make this career change. And because I've sat down and I've gone back through them and I've looked at my life and figured out how I've applied them, even when I didn't even know I applied them. And I say that to you because you probably have several examples of lessons that you've learned, several examples where you've learned about yourself and how you can be adaptable, how you can be water and roll with the flow. Because when you combine all of those things, here are the rewards. And this is what I think is the greatest thing about going for it is. Number one, confidence. Healthy confidence. Not braggadocious confidence, not trying to talk myself into things or out of things, or not trying to crush my ego or expand my ego. No. It's going for it. I don't know if my goal is to think like a monk or react like a monk, but monks always seem calm with whatever happens. And I heard it said once that I'm okay with whatever happens. Am I there yet? No, but I'm getting there. But I also have confidence in myself to be able to make this decision to leave the career that I love because I've already fulfilled my dream. So rather than take the safe and comfortable route, I'm going to expand that dream because I'm confident I have the ability to. And I'm confident because I learned these lessons along the way, right? These 8 lessons. I've also learned patience. Patience to be able to roll with it. Patience to not fly off the handle if the cappuccino spills on the train, as what happened on the train between Rome and Florence. All over the floor. Had to go find paper towels and clean it up, and the napkins on the train are really, really tiny. So you got to get a lot of them. Test your patience. But when you test your patience and you win that battle against your patience, you're like, all right, you learn perseverance. Perseverance to face those tests that come. Moving, money, burnout, sacrifice. Perseverance is a massive skill that you need in life. And looking at this town again, San Gimignano behind me, an old medieval town, 1300s think. Think about how perseverant they had to be to live then. I don't have to be that perseverant. I just have to be perseverant in my own career, in my own head. Because what happens then is you figure out how to lead yourself or understand yourself. And you figure out how to become resilient. Because that's one of those fascinating things about what Bruce Lee said with water. Not only to say water can flow or it can crash. Because water is resilient. It's the most powerful element on earth. It can wear down rocks. Give it some time. It will win. That's all combined in there because your patience, your perseverance, your resilience is what builds your confidence. And here's what happens when you understand yourself. That's what to me is confidence. I understand myself. I understand where I'm strong. I understand where I'm weak. I understand what I need to work on. I understand what I need to learn. I understand myself living in this reality. I don't worry too much about the future, and I certainly don't worry about the past anymore because it's gone. I look to the past to teach me for today. And along the way, in going for it, with these lessons and these rewards, ultimately I will tell you this. I already at the age of 45 look back at my life and say, damn, Rob, that's a life well lived. Why? Because it was the life I wanted. Because I didn't give up on the life I wanted. And now that I've gone through the gauntlet, the tests, and I know that more tests are going to come, I'm going to appreciate the tests that I didn't appreciate back then. Tony Robbins, I heard once say, when he faces a tough task, a test, he goes, ooh, a worthy opponent. Haven't had one in a while. And you can almost look forward to facing the test because a test is just something to solve a problem, a series of problems, to teach you how to think bigger, or solve bigger problems, or solve problems that involve other people and try to do it well. So the fact that I at 45 can look back and say, man, I'm glad I faced those tests because I can say already that this is a life well lived for me. There is an incredible sense of gratitude which translates into my everyday life. I think the fact that I get to sit here, right here with you from Italy is a testament to that. I'm here for a month, 2 weeks in Italy, a week in Paris where I've never been, and a week in London. I am almost stunned that I get to do this. Flabbergasted that somehow, somewhere, someone up above is smiling on me that allows me to do this. But it's because I chose this path. And I stuck with this path. And I think that that ultimately is what every philosophy ultimately says about your own life, is that when you do that, when you go down the path that's more difficult, that's challenging, one that you want to give up on but you don't. That's where you find satisfaction, a life well lived. That's when you find fulfillment and gratitude that carries into your everyday life. So that is why I sit here with you today, and I encourage you either to go for it now, keep going for it now, or encourage your kids to go for it, because in my opinion, having done it, there literally is nothing better, nothing more fulfilling. And the fact that you get to do it with amazing people along the way. I mean, I have had in my life the best of friends. It has been really tremendous. And I, as I mentioned, am incredibly grateful because I took this time to look back at my life and understand what I've been through and understand why I faced these tests and understand why the universe was testing to see if I wanted to give up, why God was testing me to see if I wanted to give up. And I kept saying no. And when you keep saying no to giving up and you don't give up, that's when the true rewards really start to come. So I sit here incredibly fortunate to be alive now, as I mentioned, not alive in 1349, living in a commune somewhere in the middle of Italy in the hills, which are absolutely stunning and gorgeous, that I can drive to, fly away from, go home, and go wherever I want. We live in the most opportune time ever. We live as Americans. We get that option. Because even here in Italy, in Rome in particular, it does not seem that the belief is there that as an individual, you get to pursue your own dreams. Now, yes, not everybody in America gets this opportunity to, but everybody can learn these lessons in going for it, no matter what it is. Do what others won't. Commit. Find your purpose. Be willing to make the sacrifices, because then you will create your opportunities. Your opportunities are going to come, but you're going to face tests along the way. But if you open yourself up to learn and you don't give up, you'll learn how to be adaptable, be like water. And then you will understand the most important fact in life is that there's only one thing that you can control. That's you. My name is Rob Hunter. Thanks for being here on Equal Matters. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and please, if you know someone that's going for it, share this with them. Maybe it'll encourage them to keep going. Maybe it's exactly what they need to hear, because I hope that in learning my lessons, as a guy that really thought about suicide just about every day of my life, to now being incredibly blessed, grateful, gracious, hopefully humble, but fulfilled. That allows me to continue forward, to keep chasing the dream. Good night.